Swung on and hammered deep to right field. Way back it goes. It is gone off the facing of the glass of the upper deck.
Hey, welcome to This Week in the Brewster, a Brewster Baseball podcast where we do a quick take around the Brewster Baseball Association, check out all the latest happenings, and see what kind of things are going on in our really super fantastic out-of-the-park baseball league. My name is Ron Collins. I am general manager of the Yellow Springs 9.
And I'm Justin Niles, general manager of the Omaha Hawks.
Been a fantastic season so far. Lots of interesting things going on. We had some wild starts. It seems like things have settled down just a little bit. So what are your thoughts? This is our first This Week in the Brewster of the year. What are your thoughts overall before we get stepping right into the divisions?
Things have settled down. It's been a long time since we've done one of these, and I've missed doing them. And I think they're fantastic. Just taking a wide scope of the entire league. And I think the first thing that jumps out at me this season is first of all how bad we've been as a franchise this year. We've taken a decent step back, but also some teams that have historically been, for lack of a better word, rebuilding since I've shown up in 2030. And this year they're kind of starting to make a name for themselves, or at least enter contention.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a weird time period, but then all of them are, right? I mean, teams go up and teams go down. Some of the forum conversations we've had about that are always fascinating. And yes, by definition, anytime that the Omaha Hawks want to take a step back, and kind of calm down, I think that's really a great thing for the league overall, or at least for me as your division mate. So feel free to have one of these. You're 31 and 39 now. I'm looking at the standings. You can have one of those years anytime you want.
Yeah, well, if the draft classes are as loaded as this past year, then we'll pick early on. That's just fine.
Well, maybe we can hit on that a little bit as we go, either this time or next. We'll just see. You want to let's take a quick spin through the divisions. Let's start with the Johnson League Atlantic, where Rockville is doing its Rockville thing.
Yeah, if there's any division that's more set in stone than the Heartland, I think this is it. There's not a whole lot of competition right now in the Atlantic for Rockville. That's not to say Atlantic City or Charm City aren't trying their greatest, but they're just not there. Brooklyn is through a well-known rebuild right now, and Montreal is also rebuilding as we speak. And so the interesting thing, I think, more than anything, is that Brooklyn went to rebuild, and up until about a week or two ago, they were actually looking pretty good during their rebuild. And now they've kind of fallen back to earth. Montreal was sort of be expected. So I think Rockville's got this division. I think they had it day one, to be honest with you. But nobody's going to step up and take Rockville out of this.
Yeah, you were talking earlier on about teams that are up and down. And 2 years ago or so, even last year with Brooklyn, and Atlantic City has always been just kind of a solid team. But a couple of years ago, Charm City decided to go do their complete rebuild, and Montreal is clearly kind of running out the string, and now Kevin's got Montreal kind of in a financial rebuild. The Atlantic was a kind of a powerhouse for a bit of time, but at this stage, essentially Rockville is the primary team that is competing, and of course Rockville is not only competing, but they're on a quest for a three-peat, and they're looking pretty dang strong doing it. So I don't think it's it didn't take a great deal of prognosticating excellence from Aaron to project himself as the Atlantic division leader, and it's coming out pretty much the way that we expected. So,
yep, and I think that kind of Rockville, I think, is probably on the way to a potential three-peat. They have a run differential of plus 132 right now, and you have to wonder how much of that is simply because they're beating up their own division. That simply is no good.
Well, they're beating up their own division, and quite honestly, the Southeast is not in that much better shape before it's all said and done. The Johnson is a league that has really settled into where everyone thought that it would be, and we can maybe talk about the Southeast now. At the end of the day, when we look at the Frick, we have some kind of players in each one of the divisions, I would say, although the Heartland has been surprising. Jacksonville is the Southeast's Rockville when it comes right down to it. And the most interesting thing that I'm thinking about when I look at Rockville and Jacksonville is not really what they're doing right this minute, but how they're going to deal with their problems in the next year or two. Rockville in particular is already, Aaron is already talking about financial things for next year because his young players are going to start getting paid. Which is a different game, as a general manager. So what are your thoughts? Jacksonville was 8-2 in their last 10. They're standing 8 games ahead of Nashville, which is one of those teams I want to talk about just a little bit, because that's one of those teams that you were mentioning at the beginning was in a perpetual rebuild when you joined the league. They've been actually kind of in a perpetual rebuild almost since I joined the league, and now Brett Golden has them up over 500 for the first time that I can remember, although maybe I'm just not remembering right. I don't think they can really compete for the division lead this year without something weird happening to Jacksonville, but they're looking interesting. What are your thoughts on Nashville right now?
They are. I think that I think that well, first off, Nashville's better than their record indicates they should be. They've won 4 more games than they were supposed to based on the run differential. But I think something that Nashville has to see is disappointing is Justin Jackson, the 24-year-old left fielder. He's actually last year he had a WAR of 6.0, and this year he's at 0.3 and projected to be 0.6. His batting average is down about 75 points. And he's not hitting the home runs like he did last year either. And so that has to be a bit disappointing for him. He had a good 2036 as well. I mean, he's had a bit of a slump this year. And so I think that is a big chunk of why they're simply not winning games this year. I think Nashville, honestly, had Jackson come out and played like he was supposed to or as expected, this division would be a lot closer. I mean, within 4 or 5 games, easy.
Well, and the interesting thing about that is Jackson being such a young player, there's a reasonable regression to mean kind of idea that says that if he comes back to just something close to what he was last year, and those numbers come up just a little bit, Jacksonville's already only 2.5 games out of a wild card slot, and maybe we can move into the Sun Belt, and I can throw out my very first strike here because it is relevant to the Nashville quest for the wild card. Before we get down into the Sun Belt, where Vegas is currently at the top of a very interesting heap of teams, my first strike here is that right now San Antonio is sitting there in the Johnson League, 4th in the Johnson League at 30, Johnson League Sun Belt Division at 38-32. They are clinging on to that last wildcard place despite being 4th in their division. And so to me, my question to you, as my first strike to you, is do you buy or sell the idea that the Sun Belt is going to send 4 teams to the playoffs?
Oh, 100%. I completely buy that this is going to happen. I'm one of the key KPIs of any team is to look at the team's run differential. As we mentioned, the only team in the Atlantic with a positive is Rockville with a plus 132, which is best in the Brewster. Like I said, maybe Rockville is just destroying other teams in these 2 other divisions that just aren't very good. But if you look in the Southeast, the only team with a positive is Jacksonville at plus 88. The others all at least are minus 19 in run differential. Nashville is over 500 right now. They're 35-34. But they've gotten lucky. As I said, they're supposed to be 31-38. I truly think that San Antonio is going to get in unless Nashville can get Justin Jackson going and maybe a couple other players that just aren't contributing right now. They did call up, Nashville did call up their number 1 prospect, Otta, a couple weeks ago. And from what I'm seeing here, I don't think he's doing very much for the team. He's hitting 245. He's got a 0.0 wins above replacement. So he's doing no better than if they just had a AAA or a quadruple A player playing right now. He's hit a couple home runs, but he's not producing like I think they thought he was going to. I think it was more of a panic move than anything. He is playing very, very good defense in right field, but I think it was more of a panic move to get him called up. He's not ready. So that's going to come back to bite him in a couple of years, I do believe.
Yeah, I think that's actually an interesting phenomena that's going on here really for the last year or two for the first time that I really remember is I'm seeing a lot of young kids being brought up before their kind of potentials suggest that that they're really quite ready. Hawaii's got their pitcher, Zach Johnson, that I've mentioned on the forum a time or two, that is in a similar kind of a situation. Des Moines brought up Chris White, but Chris White was on a major league contract, so I almost kind of understood that. And Long Chamberlain, there are a couple others, right? There are several young guys that are out there that are playing right now that I think maybe 4 years ago would have been hanging around in the minors, and so it's going to be interesting to see how those guys work out. Ada is clearly not offensively ready to play, but he can play defense with the best of them. So maybe that's what Brett is thinking about. But I appreciate you going out on the limb and saying those 4 teams are going to make it, because that's an interesting situation. And San Antonio with their pitching is so Riggs, Carpenter, and Aki Kondo are awfully hard to bet against before it's all said and done. I don't want to jinx Mike with starting pitchers issues, because he's just lost Buckland for like the 7,000th time.
If I was Nashville, what I would probably do is I would let Ada pitch. I mean, he can pitch. He's got great stuff, great movement. He's got 9 movement. There's not many players in the BBA with 9 movement anymore. Yeah. And he's got decent control. I mean, I'd let him pitch. I'd let him pitch. If he's not playing in the field, let him go out there and pitch an inning of relief, because Nashville's starting pitchers aren't great by any means. And
the follow-on semi-strike that I'll throw you here is with these 4 teams: Las Vegas, Mexico City, Phoenix, and San Antonio. Those 4 you just said are going to go into the playoffs. Will either one of them carry the second bye? We assume Rockville. I know maybe we shouldn't assume anything, right? We got Rockville and Jacksonville then would be in the playoffs. Who do you see winning the division?
Honestly, I think that Mexico City is going to win this division. I think Mexico City is a bit better than Vegas. I think that Vegas has kind of actually played a little better than they are to start out the year. And I think that those 2 teams are going to end up flip-flopping by the time it's all over.
It's going to be interesting to see, because those 4 come to the trade deadline. We're going to have some between the Sun Belt and the Pacific over on the Frick side that we'll get to in just a minute. We've got a couple of interesting scrums going on, and that could lead to some pretty wild trade deadline and month before trade deadline kind of things. Whoever breaks first might end up winning there. We'll see what happens.
I think the other side of it is that you might see some interdivision trades, which I think would be even more interesting. You might see teams swap a prospect for a current player who decide they want to sell, mm-hmm. and sell to a division rival. And then, that's always an interesting aspect when that happens, but I think that we're kind of setting ourselves up for that.
Yeah, and I kind of like your pick with Mexico City just because they feel like the most stable of teams right now. But then Fred builds teams the way I like to build teams, which is filled with lots of pretty good players, and so there's no real holes there, right, before it's all said and done. Maybe I overestimate things for Fred, but I don't think so. He's a pretty consistent general manager, and Mexico City is a tough looking team right now.
It is, and they just picked up 2 games on Las Vegas this past week, and so I truly think that it's going to completely flip, and I don't think it's going to be a close race at the end. It's not going to come down to the last week. I think Mexico City, just to clear it up here, not only are they going to switch, I think Mexico City wins this division by 5 games.
Oh my. That's pretty bold. 5 games. Let me write that one down. Mexico City, 5 games. Not that we would ever bring up projections or predictions here on the strike zone, but I applaud your chutzpah.
I'm a big fan of Mexico City. I mean, they have the best pitching staff in the game right now, best bullpen in the game, best defense in the game. I mean, they're doing some good stuff, and they're not hitting a whole lot of home runs or stealing bases, but they're getting on base and they're scoring some runs. So I really am a fan of Mexico City.
Well, let's take just a minute and switch over to the Frick, where we've got. We'll start at the top of the game chart anyway, and that's the Heartland, which I tend to like to think of as the top of the tables anyway, of course, because the Heartland is always the best division in baseball. It doesn't really matter what else is going on. My Yellow Springs 9 is looking pretty bold. What are before I don't even know what to say about that. What are your thoughts? I've got to ask, what are your thoughts about the Heartland and how it has played out?
It's been an interesting first third of the season, I suppose. We're third of the way through. I think that the biggest this may have been the biggest week for you. I mean, you had an 8-2 record, and Twin Cities, your next closest opponent, went 2-8, and you picked up 6 games on them right then and there. It went from being an 8-game lead to a 14-game lead, and probably a game-winning lead. I knew you weren't down and out last year. I tried to take advantage of it, and it didn't happen. I think the biggest surprise to me is probably that Madison's not playing a little bit better. I kind of expected to play a bit better than they have.
Yeah, Chris's team has been kind of in the doldrums. It seems like they're always chasing pitching. No matter what they do, they're always chasing pitching. And I know he's been playing with the Brooklyn Cyclone concept for a little bit, and I don't think it's working out as well for him as it has for Allen in the past. I'm actually surprised that both Twin Cities and Omaha are down. I expected at least kind of 500 records, but Twin Cities. Scott has talked a couple of different times about losing man to development issues, and Wareham is starting to show his age. So I'm wondering whether Twin Cities is starting to get into a transitory phase. It seems like Omaha is just constantly, Stoller got lost for this whole season again, right? I mean, Stoller's out.
No, 2 months.
2 months.
Roscoe was lost for basically this season and next season. And so that was a tough one for us, but Stoller's constantly out, like you said, and so
yeah. When you lose starting pitching, that hurts. I didn't think I didn't think Yellow Springs was an 80-win team last year, although Aaron projected us at 81, I think it was. But we lost 3 starting pitchers last year, and McNeil didn't play as well as McNeil should have played. So I knew we weren't an 80-win team. I did not think that we were a 657 winning percentage team, though. I don't think this can actually last. It's just at this stage I've got Yellow Springs has such a large lead that it would take a fairly catastrophic crunch for us to probably not win the division. So I'm shocked at what to do here.
Yeah, no, it's been a really good season for you. I kind of went into the season thinking that 90 wins would probably win the Heartland. I didn't think that 80 or 85 was going to win. Like you said, I didn't think you were an 80-win team. To be honest with you, I didn't think Twin Cities was an 81 team. I thought they would be up in the 85 range as well. Mm-hmm. And so I figured we'd have to get to 90 to take the Heartland, and you're going to shoot over that more than likely.
Yeah, but it's been a tough 10 days, last 10 days for the Heartland, because no team but the Yellow Springs 9 are up over 500 for the last 10 games, which, is leaving me to to do some double takes. Let's move on to the Frick Pacific, where California continues to lead that division at 41-29. They're 2 games up on Long Beach. And then Valencia, who's another one of those teams that you commented on, who's on their way up. And San Fernando, I want to talk about San Fernando for a minute. I'm going to give you my strike 2 real quick since we're here. Because San Fernando just had, you talk about Yellow Springs having a big week. San Fernando had the bigger week, right? They swept your Omaha Hawks and then went and did the same thing to Huntsville. And in the process, they did not just sweep the 2 of you, they obliterated the 2 of you. They outscored the 2 of you 42-12. So my question to you here for strike 2 is this the real San Fernando coming up? They've had such a ugly, horrible time for the first 2+ months of the season. Are we seeing an actual turn for San Fernando? Are they back for good? Do they have a realistic chance of taking the Pacific? What does this week mean to you as far as San Fernando is concerned?
Well, first off, it doesn't take much anymore to sweep the Hawks. I mean, let's just put that out there. It doesn't take very, as long as you can hit a 45-mile-an-hour fastball or just stand at the plate with your bat at your shoulders, we'll throw you 4 balls and guide you to first base. So So sweeping us isn't anything to write home to. And I think for them, they went 7-3 over their last 10, and they've only picked up one game in the division. I mean, that's tough. So to answer your question as to whether or not I think they're winning the Pacific, absolutely not. I don't think that's going to happen. As far as the actual winner goes, I think Valencia is going to still capture the Pacific title. I'm a big believer in Mexico City, and I'm a big believer in Valencia.
Obviously, I made the big post on the forum board why Valencia is going to win the Pacific, so you're on board with that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they have some pitching issues that they need to work out, but they can score runs with the best of them. They have the most home runs in a pitcher friendly ballpark, which kind of blows me away. And they have a winning record both on the road and at home, and their run differential plus 36. Shows just how lethal their offense truly is, because they've given up a lot of runs to be plus 36.
Yep. I completely agree. I absolutely adore looking at Valencia's offense and those young hitters. It's hard not to get excited by them. The Long Beach Surfers general manager Stephen Lynn came along in my little thread there and kind of threw a little cold water on, saying they don't have the pitching, and their pitching is a little threadbare. But that can be patched up just a little bit if Lee needs to or wants to. And at the end of the day, the age-old question of does good hitting beat good pitching may come to the forefront, because you've got California, who's clearly a pitching team with an offense that can get by. You've got Long Beach, who's a really fantastic-looking, well-structured team that can do a little bit of everything. And you've got Valencia, who is clearly the thumpers with enough pitching to kind of get by. And then if San Fernando is actually for real coming back, that's going to be another equally competitive and interesting division with the Johnson League Sunbelt. I'm really excited about watching the way this works. But yeah, I'm with you on Valencia, though I will admit that that there is a degree of difficulty and degree of error in that conversation. Some of it is related to me just rooting for the Stars.
And I do think that, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer on San Fernando, because I do think they're going to push for one of those last wild card spots, in the Frick League. They're only 2 games out right now.
Oh yeah.
I truly think that Seattle has a history of collapsing, and I don't think Long Beach is that good either. I mean, they don't do anything exceptionally well in Long Beach. They just do everything okay. And so I really think that San Fernando could challenge for one of those last wildcard spots.
Yeah, and a shout out to Hawaii, who seems to be settling down a little bit here. But man, they came out of the gate really strong, and I think they were blowing away an awful lot of predictions. If Zach Johnson was actually ready to go right now, they would be a really fascinating team. Fascinating team to watch.
Yeah, and they've done some good things. They've done some good things, but I always look at run differential to see how good is this team, and they're minus 41 right now. They're the only team in the Pacific that doesn't have a positive run differential. Yep. Do I think Hawaii's making the playoffs this year? Absolutely not. Do I think that they're going to compete next year and in the years to come for a while? Absolutely. That's one of those teams that's been rebuilding since I've been here, and it's been fun to watch them rebuild. And I think that they're about ready to step up and jump into the frenzy with San Fernando.
Yeah, I did not expect them to step up really at all this year. I expected them a year or two later, and while they are starting to settle, that opening was a lot of fun to watch, and who knows what can happen. Let's move on to the Frontier, where Edmonton, as I think people were expecting to begin with, has finally kind of risen to the top. They had a bit of a rugged start, but they're 44-25 and leading the division right now with Seattle and Calgary, who Yellow Springs just had a fun time with here this last week. That was great. And then we've got Boise, who's a really kind of an interesting expansion team. We'll see how they end up. And Vancouver is clearly in rebuild mode at 26-45 and not going anywhere. What are your thoughts about Edmonton? Are they the mega team that everyone was expecting?
Yeah, I think they have they're one of the better teams in the Frick. That's 100% sure. Certain. I don't think that. Do I think they're that much better than a Calgary is? No. But do I think that they're a good team in the Frick? Absolutely. I would honestly say that Edmonton is probably in the same conversation with California and Long Beach. Teams like that, they kind of all seem to blend in together, because they don't have anything that really separates them. Edmonton is a team that I'm slowly and surely rooting for, just because it's another team that was in that rebuild when I came in and has not been good for a while. And so it's fun to watch their young guys come in and do what's expected of them. They've had William Wood, and they got Fernando Cruz from Brooklyn over the offseason, and that was a good decision for them. I mean, they're not paying anything for it, so why not take a shot at it?
Oh yeah.
I think the real star though is Stephen Collins. I mean, he's phenomenal. He's probably the leader of this team, and he's hitting leadoff for them, and so that's a fun thing to watch as well.
Yeah, they've got a young and fantastic core of players, but I think actually their most important acquisition a year and a half ago or 2 years ago was Chris Robillard in the general manager seat. Having a stable general manager in Edmonton at this point when their young players are ready to go is probably the thing that really makes the biggest difference, because they have had young players for quite some time, but I don't know that they've had the consistent frame of reference to guide them into their proper slots. And now that Chris has got some tools, and both internal tools and a set of players that you just rattled off, that's going to be fun to watch how he goes forward. I'm most interested in over in the Johnson League. I was interested in Rockville and Jacksonville for how they were going to deal with the backside of their build. I'm very interested in watching how Chris goes about building a long-running Edmonton string.
Yeah, I mean they have one of the best starting pitching staffs, obviously, in the BBA. They picked up Troop over the offseason, and he's been phenomenal for them. He's thrown the most innings, I think, in the BBA this year. Bobby Lynch has been good for them. They have a 1 through 4 that can probably go with just about anybody, and they've had a few injuries as well. I mean, Mitch Dalrymple is a right fielder for them. He's been out. He's going to be returning. He's been phenomenal. He has a 351 batting average. So they have some players for sure. I think that they probably are. If somebody's going to give you a run for your money in the playoffs, I think it's probably Edmonton.
Yeah, and let's do a quick kind of tick down the wild card, because it shows the difference between the Frick and the Johnson, right? We talk about the Johnson being pretty top heavy, where it's relatively easy to pick out the Atlantic and Southeast Division winners, right? And then you've got your 4 Sunbelt contenders for the title, for the division title. You look down in the wild card race, and really Nashville in the Southeast is still a semi-reasonable chance, and then you get a big jump down into the Louisville's, Huntsville's, Atlantic City's 6, 7, 8 games back. If you look over on the Frick side of the coin, if you give Yellow Springs the Heartland division, which I almost cringe to say because we're sitting here in June and I'm waiting for this big collapse, but if you say that that's going to happen, most likely you've got California being a playoff team, if not actually a division winner, right? And we're big on Valencia. Let's say Edmonton is the Frontier Division winner. You've got Seattle, you've got Long Beach, you've got San Fernando, you've got Calgary, you've got Hawaii even is only 5 games back. We just kind of pretended to drive a nail in their coffin, but they're only 5 games back on the wild card. And then you've got both Twin Cities and Boise. Neither one of them look particularly strong right now, but they're only 6 games back on the wild card. So you start to get into that realm of where in the Johnson League you only get 1 or 2 teams down, whereas in the Frick League we have quite a bit of more of a scrum for the wild card. We talked about the scrums for the Sunbelt Division and the Pacific Division as far as taking the title is concerned. What are your thoughts around this wild card situation?
Well, I see. I don't think that. I hate to say it, but I don't think Long Beach is going to make the playoffs. I don't think they're going to get in at all. I think San Fernando and Calgary, one of those 2 teams is going to take that spot if not both Seattle and Long Beach's spots. I'm high on Calgary. I'm high on San Fernando's rebuild, if that's what you want to call that. San Fernando's also been missing their shortstop for most of the season, and he's back. He's hitting well. He's plays phenomenal defense, and so I think that San Fernando and Calgary and Valencia are going to be the 3 wildcard teams.
I can't argue against that. What it basically means with this collection of teams that are fighting for it is at least 2 pretty good teams are not going to make the playoffs, and I wouldn't argue against Long Beach being one of those 2. I wouldn't argue against It's hard to call with San Fernando. It depends on their age. They're getting a little creaky, which is part of what my concern with Long Beach and their pitching.
Let's talk about Boise a little bit. I'm going to toss you out my first strike. I believe I don't think I've thrown you any strikes yet. I'm going to toss you my first strike here about Boise. They haven't put up a great season. They're 6 games under 500. They went 6-4 over their last 10. They have won their last 2. But I want to talk specifically about their center fielder, Dennis French. Typically, as the season winds on, early stats come down to reality. Players fall back to earth. He's got a 4.11 batting average through the first 67 games, a 6.53 slugging percentage, a 4.7 wins above replacement, which is 1 higher than the next guy in line, which is Emilio Morales. He's also been playing phenomenal defense in center field. Boise isn't, like I mentioned, they're not a powerhouse. They're not at the top of the standings, probably looking at watching the playoffs from home. How much is that going to hurt him among some voters if he keeps this pace and finishes with a batting line above 390? Is he your MVP? Because he sure is mine.
He is. I would say he's the player in the league that I covet the most. I would love to see Dennis French in a Yellow Springs 9 uniform, and I think that even my current center fielder in Mauro Saucedo would understand why why I would say that. Dennis French is probably the most exciting player in the league. It will be an interesting question. I love that question, right? Can a guy on a losing team win the MVP? And in our case, it's an interesting question because the award is Sawyer Silk, which is we still argue about it, right? Is it an MVP or is it the most valuable offensive player? How much does defense play into it or whatnot? But French just has it all. And at 20, what is he, 21? Among the things that sets Dennis French apart is that offensively, not only is he this mega, you see a lot of, these days, you're seeing a lot of contact hitters, right? Mexico City is a team that builds off contact and doesn't worry so much about power. But Dennis French can hit home runs. Dennis French can walk enough. He can put 40, 50 walks down to where suddenly that even if he cools to 380 or 370 as a hitter, he's going to have an on-base percentage up in the low 400s. Boy, can he win the MVP in Boise? Maybe it depends on the hype. It depends maybe on how much Jeff Palin can push him around the league. He would be somebody I would be happy to vote for. And maybe it also depends a little bit on what else is going on around the division. If San Fernando kicks up into the same offensive gear that they had last year, and you've got 1 or 2 of their guys putting up numbers that are close, and they drive to the division title, then maybe the San Fernando guy, whichever one of that collection, we or Moreland or Mendoza or any of them could end up doing that. Yeah, I could definitely see Dennis French as the MVP. I could definitely see him as a Sawyer Silk. If not this year, then next.
Yeah, I have a really hard time not voting for him if he hits 30 home runs, steals 40 bases, and has a batting average of 390 while playing defense like he is.
Yeah, I could definitely have a hard time voting against him. It does, like I say, depend a little bit on who else is doing what, obviously. But But the real question at the heart of this is can a superstar on a losing team win the MVP? And I think the answer to that is yes. If he puts up numbers that are like Dennis French is doing right now, that would be really hard to push down, right? Because it's looking like he's going to be a kind of a Mike Trout 11, 12 WAR kind of guy before it's all said and done. So he'd be hard to vote against.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you've been since we've kind of started talking, you've been really, really high on San Fernando. And so I just want to throw strike two right to you about San Fernando, specifically maybe about Feliciano Rafael, their starting pitcher. I don't think there's truly a standout Nebraska award winner this year. If I had to pick someone, I think Rafael would probably be the best out of the pitchers. But let me ask, is this the year of the reliever? Could there be a reliever win the Nebraska award? Fernando Marquez from Rocksville and Javier Garcia from Vegas both have been very, very good. And I don't know, they might steal some votes from Rafael, to be honest with you.
Well, it's possible, right? I mean, if you look at Nebraska, right, Marquez. Let me go back, right? Your question, is this year the reliever? I think the answer might be yes, but not with the guys that you're throwing out there, especially with Rafael. Rafael's in the Frick League, whereas Marquez and Garcia in the Johnson League are definitely pitching really well. But if you look at the Johnson League, it's got this mass of pretty solid pitchers, and my guess is that one of those guys are going to come out of it, right? And my actual favorite is San Antonio's Riggs Carpenter, who I thought had a outstanding year last year and was in the mix. If San Antonio does, I'm actually, knock on wood, hoping San Antonio comes out more like second or third in that Sun Belt. And if they do, it will be because I think Riggs Carpenter and Aki Kondo, that combination, lead them in. Not to take anything away from either Marquez or Garcia, but I think your real question on the year of the reliever fits with Rafael and the Frick League, right? Because Rafael is clearly the starter who is ahead of everyone else right this minute. We'll see what happens over the last half of the year. But the most interesting dark horse to me on the Frick Nebraska is Long Beach's reliever Manny Gabriel. The guy is leading the league in ERA and FIP, has better ERA and FIP. He's got 68 innings pitched in our 50-ish, 60, 65, whatever games. So if you multiply that out, he could end up with 150 innings. And so that's the interesting question there is, can a reliever with 150 innings who leads the league in ERA and FIP and maybe drops down 10, 12 wins in the process, can a reliever like that win in a down year for starters? Right now I wouldn't bank on it, but I'm thinking that if I'm picking a reliever as a dark horse to win in Nebraska, right now it's Long Beach's Manny Gabriel.
Absolutely. No, I agree completely. I think that it's if Rafael has the second half like he's had for the first half here, it's going to be hard not to hand it to him. But at the same time, if Gabriel throws 150 innings and has ERA under 2.5, it's going to be hard not to give it to him. And so I think it'll be an interesting finish for both of them, or it'll be an interesting finish to see where Gabriel finishes on the Nebraska voting. If he finishes in the top 5, that I think that's a victory in itself.
Alrighty. Well, let me throw you out my second strike? My third strike. Which strike is this? That'll be my third strike.
I think this is strike 3 for you.
This is strike 3 for me. The umpire has lost count. What am I going to do? We're talking about pitchers here. Let me talk about another pitcher. Rockville's Dan Cannon, 29 years old. He is 50 strikeouts away from 2,000. His win-loss record, 126 wins, 101 losses. So 29 years old, 126 wins, nearly 2,000 strikeouts. If you throw these numbers into the Bill James favorite toy, he's got something in the range of 80% shot to make 200 wins and 300 or 3,000 strikeouts, something in the range of 30 to 40% chance to make 250 wins and 3,500 strikeouts. 29 years old. Is Dan Cannon a Hall of Famer?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, he's going to make the Hall of Fame. I mean, not only does he have 5 straight All-Star appearances, he has 2 rings. And in my opinion, he has the potential to finish with enough to fit an entire hand. So when he remains in Rockville, and he might finish with 5 rings. Who knows? I don't know. He's 29. He probably has 6 years left in the tank. Figuring he strikes out, let's go low number 125 a season. He should make 2,500 rather easily. I think he easily gets to 3,000 strikeouts. 3,500 will never happen. I don't think that's going to happen. But if he strikes out 175 pitches a season over the next 6 years, that'll give him an even 3,000 strikeouts for his career. I think he finishes with 3,018 strikeouts and, let's say, 204 wins. I'm going to give him 13 wins a season for the next 6. And then I think he hangs it up. I think at age 36, he hangs it up, finds his place in the Hall, and he tells all those that are undeservingly in the Hall of Fame about his Landis memories.
Yeah, I think you bring up a extremely strong point in the fact that he is a central part of the at this stage growing toward legendary collective of players right now. And I can remember when Aaron brought him in, that was quite a controversial deal because of his contract and that came from Atlantic City. That was a bold move, and it is paid out in worth. Dan Cannon is worth his weight in gold right now, and I think the only thing that can keep him from a Hall of Fame ending would be an early injury, right? Pitchers you can never say absolutely, but obviously if he stays healthy, those numbers look pretty strong, and his aura around the league is just going to grow.
Absolutely. Hey, why don't you do a little bit of research, unless you happen to know this? Which player has the most Landis rings in their collection at home?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know.
I think that's an interesting analysis, and also maybe a top 50 or something, if there's a nice spreadsheet that kind of shows the top 50 Landis Award winners and if they're in the Hall of Fame or not. I think would be a really cool analysis to see how much does a ring really affect your chances to get into the Hall of Fame.
That sounds like a project for Randy. That's what I think. Calling out to Randy. Randy, give us your spreadsheet with the most Landis rings in Hall of Fame stuff. That sounds fantastic. How's that for delegating?
That's fantastic. As long as somebody does it, it's not me. That sounds fantastic to me.
You got a third strike coming?
I do. There's a couple of odd streaks going on. All 3 of my strikes have had to do with season stats so far this year. There's a couple of odd streaks going on, though. My question to you is, which one will last the longest? Derek Falter of Rockville has a current 9-game winning streak, and he hasn't lost since 2035, despite 144 appearances. On the other flip side of it, Marcos Villegas of Wichita has a 10-game losing streak, last recording a win to push his record to 1-1 in 2037. Which one of these guys are gonna, is Falter gonna lose first, or is Villegas gonna win a game?
That's kind of two of the weirdest little streaks that I've seen. My cap is tipped to you, Justin, for finding these. Oh goodness, I don't know. That's a great question. I love looking at Derek Falter. No losses since 2035, despite 144 appearances. That's got to be some kind of a record. It seems like. I would tend to think that Falter would likely lose before Villegas would win, just because Wichita is still struggling for wins, whereas Falter has got to blow up sometime, doesn't he?
I would imagine so. He's the poor guy's only lost 1 game his entire career.
That would be interesting to actually have a copy of that game log or that box score, right? Yeah, I would say Falter, but man, what an interesting question, and what an interesting situation there.
I agree completely. I think Falter's gonna have more appearances, and I think he's gonna have a better chance of losing than Wichita is at winning. Fortunately, so I agree completely. I think they're two very interesting live current streaks that are going on, and I'll be watching closely to see, I guess if Falter gets unlucky, or if Villegas gets lucky and gets a win.
Well, there you go. That's our run through the league this week with our 3 strikes apiece. That was a lot of fun. Thanks for taking the time to put those together and making me think about these things. We'll try to do it again maybe next week and see if we can get back on a regular cycle if that works for you.
Absolutely. I'm hoping that you go 1-9 this week, and that we talk about that next week.
Well, I wouldn't put it completely out of the realm of possibility. But on that note, I think I will bid us adieu and hope everyone out there, number 1, enjoyed listening to us ramble, and number 2, has a fantastic week next week. The Brewster Baseball Association is an out-of-the-park baseball league that's commissioner is the one and only Matt Rechtenwald. Check us out at montybrewster.net. Music is Take to the Skies by Forget the Whale and is used through Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial License. See you next time, Brewster fans. Until then, have fun, be safe, and always remember that defense is highly overrated.